is why I love software, because at its core, you see a problem in the world and you're like, I can do something about that. And I, out of thin air, like there's nothing was there except the thought of what could be. And then you write some code, and then all of a sudden, if you could give advice to somebody going to a boot camp or thinking about going to a boot camp, what would your advice be?
No, don't just go to the boot camp and say, I got this.
It's not like going to the camp and doing everything that you're asked is going to be enough.
It's not enough. I mean, even for me in college, I don't think even going for my degree was enough.
It's not enough. Yeah. What I believe I know what I think needs to exist. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe every developer needs to be writing small apps continually,
especially early on in your career.
Yes.
And I'll say, and I've talked to several of my people that were interns, whatever. I was like, I wrote the same calculator app how many times?
Yeah.
Like, it didn't matter, right? But it's to kind of get into new technologies. Can I actually understand how to do this without looking things up or something like that?
Yeah.
And it's not for the case of memorization. It's for just that mental exercise of, can I piece this together?
Yeah. And just taking and this is why I love software, because at its core, you see a problem in the world and you're like, I can do something about that. And I, out of thin air, like there's nothing was there except the thought of what could be. And then you write some code, and then all of a sudden you've solved a problem. That is why I love software development.
Well, and this is where they say like software development has a low barrier to entry, right? You just need a computer. That's kind of it.
And an imagination, yeah.
Right.
I remember
Well, you don't even need an imagination, right? I mean, I think you talked about your mom and her problem that she had. Like, yeah, it wasn't an imagination; it was a practical problem.
Yeah. So my parents, they were. They didn't have like a real job for most of my life. I shouldn't say that. They had real jobs, but for a large chunk of my life, they sold stuff. They just found stuff that people were selling for X, and they sold it for 2X. Turns out that you can make a pretty decent living off of that. And I remember my mom had these like index cards where she wrote down the name of the item, the eBay ID, the description, what she bought it for, and what she sold it for, and whether it was sold or not, or the date it was sold. And I'm like, Mom, these are index cards. Like, I can make you I can do this. And so I made this little app in Java, because that was the only language I knew at the time. I started making an app in Java, and I parodied it off of this note card that she did. But I didn't know about databases. I didn't know what a database was. So my persistent storage was a text file that I read, and it was good. But after it loaded the entire file in memory, and after about 300 or 400 entries,
it
got slow. And I was even storing images as text. Like, I was converting the images into binary, putting it in a text file. This file was like gigs, and this is back when like a gig was like big. A lot, yeah. But I just remember my mom, like, she probably entered like 2,000 or 3,000 records into this database, took pictures. She spent like a week, and it crashed. And I had this little thing where I would like trim the file or like do something to make it run fast. And eventually I gave up and said, you know, Mom, thank you for being my beta user, but we're not doing this anymore. And but yeah, stuff like that. Like that's, I think, just looking at the world, looking at the things that you interact with on a daily basis, and asking yourself, how can I write a program to make this easier? I think that is what needs to supplement whatever education you have.
So I think, you kind of bring up a point. So like you said you built this application using Java because that's what you knew.
That's all I knew. Yeah.
So but how did you get to that point of even knowing it?
I went to Marquette, and you had to know Java. I think that's where I learned it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that was their...
No. It was taught in high school. That's where I learned it. So I learned how to write in high school, like sophomore year. And I was quickly outpacing... Like, I was bored. I could get the exercises done in like 5 minutes, and then I would move on. And I'm like, I want to do something more. So yeah, I did have... someone taught me. Like, never forget Mr. Wrist. Oh, I forgot about that guy. One of the best teachers I ever had.
Okay. I mean, honestly, for me, it was Boyland. His classes were so. The one exercise that is in my mind is he gave everybody a C program or C++ program. There were 100 bugs in there. You had to find them all.
That's mean.
Well, I mean, but honestly, like, and I think that kind of, I think you probably see like, okay, that's where I say like, okay, like how would I test this? How would I approach this?
Yeah,
is because like, yeah, I mean, my experience being taught was find the problem. But yeah, no, when I started, I just knew I wanted to build games. I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
So I went to IBM and they're going to teach you C and C++. Great. I'm going to go learn Unreal Engine because that's C++. And then I bought the 2,000 page book and I was like, I don't know what any of this means.
I feel like when we were young, programming was like this niche thing that like you had to be like ultra passionate about. But now it's like everybody can code. Everybody's taught how to code. That was like a thing in like 2014 or 2018.
Yeah.
Like,
because it's just the thing that
it's the future. But all those people, like maybe they didn't want to code. Maybe that wasn't like the thing that they were passionate about, but they just did it because someone said, hey, if you do this, you can get a 6-figure salary.
Mm-hmm.
So you got, and some of those people, maybe they didn't want to go to college, so they go to this boot camp. But I think to be a really good developer, you have to have this like burning,
you need to want to learn.
There's just,
it's the hunger.
I really want to write code and not just for the sake of coding, but I really want to solve problems, and software is a way to do that.
Where do you start? Right? Because I mean, like you said, like you learned in high school, I learned in college, and obviously the first job I took had nothing to do with C++. It was classic ASP, HTML, CSS, JavaScript.
Yep.
I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
Like I literally went in blind. Like I was like, I can do this, and it's just like day one, I'm like, wait, I have to turn this thing red. How do I do that?
Yeah.
Because I didn't really. I mean, like I kind of had a MySpace, but like that's not what I learned on. So I mean, luckily we had a tool that we had a program that to help teach, give courses, whatever it is, and like. I just sat there and consumed. I just was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm just continually learning. Like, I want to make sure I can do this, whatever it is. And like, that's just what I had to do to survive. Maybe it wasn't that dire, but.
What was the tool?
Pluralsight.
The Pluralsight taught classic ASP at the time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, right. It's roughly in the age, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure they probably listed a lot of that content.
I forgot. They've been around for a long time.
They've been around for a long time.
Yeah. For me, I can't sit and watch a video. I'll learn a very specific concept, and then I'll like use it a bunch of times. Yeah. And more recently, I've been learning how to build games, and now I've been coding for a long time, but when you're learning how to build a game and you've never built games before, like you kind of
it's a whole different mindset.
Yeah, you feel like a kid again. Like, and I remember like I just like, let's just start with how do I render something on the screen, and I get really good at that, and then I'm like, okay, well, how do I move it back and forth? Okay, let's learn that.
And to kind of like bridge some gaps here. So like, again, we're coming from a web development background, right?
Yeah.
So everything is call and response, right? You make a request, you get a response, and then you kind of, everything's interaction that way.
Yep.
Desktop applications, similar, right? And you can have real time like polling and stuff, and those are very similar concepts between desktop and web development. When you get to game development, though, there's an engine running, and the engine, and this is kind of very similar to like if you're familiar with React or Vue or Angular. It has what's known as a life cycle.
There's a clock.
There's a clock that's constantly running. So it's like, rendering is at the end. So first comes physics, then comes input, then comes this. Like it is on a clock, and it is always moving. So like, and it's just a different thought process of how do I wrap my head around these problems?
Well, and the negative side to the way that I learned it was I would learn how to do player input, but I might have put it, well, I know I did. I put it in the wrong lifecycle event. So it created problems further down that I had to deal with later on. But I guess I don't regret learning it that way, because
Now you know why
now
you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, like when you make the mistake and you can see the implications of it, it'll guarantee you never make that mistake again. And that's kind of how I learned how to code. I remember too, like one of the first jobs we worked at, we had this. So we learned it was classic ASP, and it was SQL with stored procedures, and it used ADO for the interacting with the database. And I was working part-time with my dad drilling, and there was like 8 employees, and I remember my dad was like, I don't know where this person is, and I'm like, hey, I can build an app for that. Like, and I recreated our personnel management system. Remember?
Yeah.
I literally recreate, like, I made tables with color. It looked exactly like it. I saw it and I'm like, I'm gonna try to build it. I built it with classic ASP. He used that too. My parents were really supportive of my programming.
Thinking back now,
he made people use it, and I'm sure like it's like, oh, it's just this kid who built something. But I really appreciated that of them. But I remember, yeah, I recreated that from scratch, and it was basically a glorified spreadsheet where I could control colors based on a status. But just doing that like dozens and dozens of times, eventually you get really good.